Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. This is Kathy, and today's video is part of the Use It Up or Dig It Out video and blog hop hosted by Renee Moran. And I decided to dig out a couple of stamp sets and a die set that I haven't used in quite some time. The stamps that I'm using are Happy Hoppy by Gerda Steiner Designs and Happy Words by Concord and Ninth, and the die set is Blueprints 13 by My Favorite Things. So the Happy Words stamp set by Concord and Ninth and the Blueprints 13 by My Favorite Things are retired products, but the whole point of this video was to share with you how I was inspired by a new release from another company. I saw a sample that was created by Laura Dovalo, and I really liked the sample, and the first thought in my head was I need that stamp set. But then this hop came about and I thought, wait a minute, I have stamps that I could use. So that's how I came up with the idea for this particular card. It was very much inspired by Laura Dovalo, as I mentioned, and I'm going to share a couple of tips and tricks with you to alter things that you may have in your stash to work and be very similar to a new release from another company, if that makes any sense at all. So I stamped the bunny using My Favorite Things Extreme Black Hybrid ink on a piece of Cougar Super Smooth cardstock. I did the coloring the way I normally do my coloring. I started with my darkest, added it in where the darkest areas would be or where the shadows would be, and then worked my way out to the lightest. I'll have all of the colors that I used linked in the description below, and I'll also have the products that I used listed there as well. After I finished coloring the bunny, I did cut him out with the coordinating die, and then I stamped and colored the balloon. You can ignore the brown bunny. I kind of thought that I was going to do a brown bunny, but then I changed my mind, and so I just stamped and colored him again in grays. So for the balloon, I decided to color that in with a couple of different blue-green markers. I started with BG49, and I did a fairly thin line all the way around the balloon, but I made sure not to have that darkest color go all the way out to the edge of where the balloon is actually stamped. Then I came in with BG15 and added in a little comma shape just to maintain a highlight, which in the end didn't matter because I colored right over it. Next I brought in BG57 and I started to color from the bottom moving up, and I did use a flicking motion. I wanted the balloon to be darker at the bottom than the top. After the BG57, I brought in BG15 and extended those flick lines out a little bit higher, especially up around the sides of the balloon, and then I made sure to leave a white spot right smack in the center. Then I finished it off with BG13 and filled in the white space that I had left for a highlight. And then I did one more coat with the BG15 just to blend all of those colors together. And I went out of the lines, so I used my colorless blender to clean that up just a little bit. I used the fishtail banner from Blueprints 13, but I didn't want it to be a fishtail. I wanted it to be more of a pennant type of banner. So all I did was some partial die cutting and just put the very end of the die at the very end of my cardstock and ran it through my die cut machine. I decided that I wanted to have the angles of the pennant be a little bit of a steeper angle, so I just used a ruler to draw a straight line and then went from the point of the pennant banner and drew the diagonal lines, and then used my paper trimmer to cut along those lines so that the pennant would be at more of a point. To stamp the word happy 3 times and make sure that I got it lined up and spaced properly, I stamped it first onto a piece of grid paper. Then I used temporary adhesive to hold that into my stamp platform and lined up my banner where I wanted to start stamping the word happy and used that as a guide. I stamped the word happy using Distress Oxide ink in peacock feathers. And before I removed the stamp from the stamp platform door, I did put a piece of acetate to protect the banner so I didn't get any ink smudges on the banner while I was fiddling around with the placement of the stamp. Once I was happy with the placement, I closed the door and picked up the stamp and then removed the acetate. I did double stamp the word just to make sure that I got a nice clean impression. And then I used my paper trimmer just to cut off the extra cardstock up at the top. Next, I moved on to the sentiment, and that little fishtail banner is also from the Blueprints 13 die set. I stamped the sentiment, which is from the Happy Words stamp set, using Versamark ink because I wanted to do some heat embossing. And here's my favorite part. In order for the embossing powder to stick, you kind of have to pour it over the part where you stamped it, not the back side. I think if you could have seen my face when I was pouring the embossing powder and nothing stuck, it probably would have been a pretty classic look because I was a little bit confused, and then I remembered just to turn it over so that the stamped side would be up when I poured the embossing powder. Anyway, I heat set that with my heat tool and set that aside, and then it was time to add a string to my balloon. So I used a little bit of liquid glue on the back side of the balloon and pressed a piece of black twine into the liquid glue. And to make sure that it stays in place, I put a piece of foam tape on top of that. I set that aside so that it had a little bit of time to dry. Then I used liquid glue to adhere the fishtail banner to the bottom of my pennant. I used my stitched rectangle dies to cut down a piece of patterned paper from my stash. I think it's from Echo Park. If I can find the collection, I will have that linked below. Anyway, I adhered that to a piece of teal paper that I had cut with a stitched rectangle die that was just a little bit bigger than the one that I used for the patterned cardstock. I adhered that to the front of a top folding A2 size note card, and my card base is Nina Classic Crest cardstock. I put a bunch of foam tape on the back of the bunny as well as on the back of my banner, and I placed those on the front of my card, but I didn't press anything down until I was happy with the placement. Once I was happy with where everything was, that was when I pressed down, and then I removed a piece of foam tape from the bunny's ear just to make sure that he was flush with the banner and the balloon. I used a little bit of liquid glue on the back of his ear to make sure that it was adhered down, and placed an acrylic block on top of that just to hold it in place so the glue had a chance to set. I put a little dot of glue on the bunny's paw so it would look like he was actually holding the balloon, and trimmed off the excess twine with my scissors, and then I had to put the string back in his hand because it moved. I decided to add a little bit of sparkle to the balloon, so I used my Wink of Stella glitter pen for that. And to finish up the card, I added just a few enamel dots, and that's it. That finishes up my card for today. To watch the other videos that are a part of this hop, all you have to do is click on the hashtag found in the description box below. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.